I'm Eemeli. I work on localization at Mozilla. Some of it on Firefox, some of it on all our other products. And I have taken it upon myself a little bit to try and make localization better for everyone on the web. And so the work that we are doing is, and the reason we put this much focus in is in some extent represented by this graph, which is the top 5, or is it 6? It's 6 UI locales for desktop Firefox. This is public data that you can find. But what this is fundamentally showing is that only 40% of Firefox desktop users at the moment, and for the past 5 years at least, are experiencing the browser with the content that is defined effectively by the developers and so on, who are directly working on it. 60% of our users are experiencing the browser with content defined by our localizers. So localization is driving the representation of the content for the majority of our users. And if you actually start looking at the numbers, like the EN-US numbers, we have more EN-US users outside North America than in North America. So it gets all sorts of weird. Point is, we have a lot of global users for Firefox, and we're pretty sure that we're not the only browser or other product with this sort of a spread of usage. And the other part of what makes me really happy to be working at Mozilla on standards and improving the web is that not only are we trying to make money in order to keep the whole concern going, we're also a foundation with an actual manifesto that you can go and find about making the world better for actual people. And beyond that, we have a document called the Mozilla's Vision of the Web, or for the web, that includes quite a few parts that end up being directly relevant to what I'm supposed to be working on, or that I feel like if I don't work on it, I'm not sure anybody else will. And one key part of this is about recognizing that declarative styles of UI, UX building are ultimately going to provide a much better experience than imperative styles, such as by JavaScript or otherwise. I don't expect you to read this whole block of text. I'm not gonna. But that leads me to what I'm. If you really wanted to read the big block of text, I'll share the link and you can read it from there. What I'm really fundamentally trying to advance here is client-side localization systems and availability of such without needing to resort to scripting, in other words, JavaScript, in order to do the localization work. And, I get light effects. I'm okay with this. And so, to show off a little bit of what this means for us, at least at Firefox, is that this is the About Mozilla page, which has been around for ages. Every few years, I think the last time was 6 years ago, we changed which verse of the book of Mozilla is served to you. But even this part, like among all the other parts of Firefox, the browser, really the HTML content driving that page is this. And so the key parts here I've highlighted in bold are identifying the parts that are really linking up with the localization system that is providing the letters on the page that you see there. We have a data eltanen ID on a couple of these elements that we've defined. And then we have a link with a rel of localization pointing to an FTL, a fluent page. And that then ends up getting linked together, connecting the data, and also getting the contents of this FTL page to provide the whole experience of this page with the rendered contents. And so there's a bunch of features here. I'm going to get into some of more of the details of what is possible with this style of DOM localization. But ultimately, a key part of it is that this is how the UI and the UX of Firefox and the other Mozilla products is already built these days. And we would like to provide to build the next version of what we are already using as a part of the HTML and other related specifications, as a part of the web stack, rather than keeping this as a thing that we just find really, really useful. And so, a slightly more detailed example of what we have going on now. You can have multiple links to localization resources in a single HTML page. Exactly the same way you can have links to multiple CSS files in a single page, defining the styles. You can define the messages from multiple different sources. And also on the last line there, you can see the second button there is not only are we defining an identifier for this is the message, we're also defining, oh, hey, when you're formatting it, you've got this context of a tab count argument with a number 1 in it. And then this ends up being formatted. Now, this is what works for us, but this is not the DOM localization that I think we ought to have for the web itself. Because for that, we've got to learn some of the lessons we've learned working on Fluent. Fluent itself, what we use at Mozilla, is very much an integrated stack, like here's the solution for everything you're getting, whereas the solution for the web is not a single silo of this is the whole thing. It's more here, have a stack of standards and things that you can work on. One key part is I'm pretty sure that eventually we'll be able to want to define directly what language you're referring to for the localization resources, and rather than using the data dash, the data set contents for the attributes, it would be really, really nice to have something possibly shorter, more sensible than data elton and ID as the way to identify what message to refer to. And finally, when passing in variables, it should not in an HTML world be a JSON blob that you're passing in, for instance. And then this is what a Fluent localization resource file looks like at the moment, where you can have references to terms like the brand full name there, and then you can have you can associate multiple attribute values with a single identifier that you then use for the localization. Like you can see there with the tab context, new tab open, we have both a label and an access key that we're defining for the same thing. And then the variable 1, the tab count that we ended up passing in on the previous slide, you can see how we're using it here. We are doing plural selection because we need to formulate the different message depending on what the values of the variables are for the formatting. But this, again, is how we've ended up defining things and using them for Firefox, and this is not exactly what we think is the best solution for the web as a whole. And for that, I'm pretty sure it's something much closer to this. So this is a message resource file where the syntax is closer to TOML, perhaps, and where the individual message values here are using the Unicode MessageFormat syntax that has been specified there. The whole syntax of the file as a whole is being incubated at the W3C internationalization working group for this. But trying to work on this, and this is me presenting, hey, this is stuff that is sort of happening, possibly happening sometime soon, and trying to get some help in this project. Now, looking at in some more detail about how does something like DOM localization work? Like with CSS style elements, it should be entirely valid to have messages being defined entirely within an HTML document. For example, an example messages block here that is then referenced in further content in the page, where the rendering of this would end up when rendering the div with the message identifier of example, look up the example message content and put that within that div. And it should also be possible for us to do HTML things with this. So when, for example, we have in this case, what we have is the localizable content that we have includes a link. And we would like for the target of that link to not be localizable. So the thing going to the localizers does not need to know that the link goes to the href of / page. But instead, what we need to do is an overlay, effectively, of the attributes coming in and the content coming in into what's already there in the HTML element itself. There's like so many little details of this that we've been thinking about, that we have some solutions for, but that ought to get discussed way more. I'm not going to list like all the possible things, but another part of this is that, as I showed earlier, it should be possible to, rather than have the content inline in the HTML page, have a reference to another file elsewhere for it, and to get the content from there. In this particular example, all of the content is E and US, American English, and we're even including a fallback content in the div itself. But it should also be possible to do language switching. I envision this effectively as very close to what we're doing with dark mode versus light mode selection for CSS, where we can, and maybe should, I don't know, have a browser level control for the preferred language for presenting a page itself, or to provide a JavaScript API that a page can itself use for selecting a language from what's available. So this, for instance, can be an HTML page that you would serve to all of your users with these contents. And then when you then are rendering the page, you will have information about the actual preferred language that the user has. And then you would end up looking up a message resource file and then filling this page with those contents instead. And this is perhaps best demonstrated with what happens actually in Firefox at the moment. So Firefox itself, this is the About Mozilla page as I was showing you. I've got the browser currently set to British English, but if I go to the language selection for the UI and I change it to Finnish, the browser is immediately and completely localized now in Finnish. And this has been... This is possible because the functional systems driving the localization of Firefox are declarative. So, the page we were looking at here, this is the HTML for that page. And this is the ENUS, or ENGB, I think is used as the same Fluent file. But when we are rendering this page with a UI language of Finnish, we're looking up a different FTL file, getting different contents, and loading it in here. And this is kind of cool. And getting, so one of the key things that I think we could provide with this style of localization is making it easy for web content to do real-time language switching, which is currently kind of hard to get right. So we should. It's not the only benefit, but it is one of the clear benefits of letting the developer, when they're working on localization of anything, be able to just define, use this message here, this is how you use this message, and here are the different locales definitions for what this message is, and then fill it out. One key part that I'll get to in a moment is, if you look at the example content that ends up indeed highlighting here with different styles some parts of the content. These are coming in the fluent DOM localization system we use for Firefox. These are coming from HTML that we are parsing after formatting in a slightly clumsy way. But they are, so the output of the localization, what I'm getting at, is not just, it's not just text, but it's really a fragment of HTML with limitations for what's allowed and how do you really deal with it. But still, it's not just text, it's HTML. And there are then interesting parts to what happens when you start looking at localization and having a rich localization system available. And one part is that stuff doesn't stay the same in the same order. It did not take me a lot of work to find an example for this one message from our actual localizations, where the English source and many other locales have the message with renaming file name on provider failed. But some locales end up switching the order around because it's more natural. Sorry, I think the fonts ended up a little bit weird. The Chinese both use the same font, and then the Kazakh is using a fallback font for the rendering. Sorry about that. The point is that languages will work in different ways than you presume. And so when trying to figure out how do you make a DOM localization system, you end up needing to realize that, oh, there are times when stuff moves around. I was not able to find too many examples of this happening together with localized inline HTML elements in our current systems, but here's an example from going from English to Japanese, where the elements changed the order around. So one of the interesting things we allow for in Firefox, but I hope we can possibly eventually allow in something like DOM localization for HTML, is this sort of localizer control for how do you express a thing naturally, rather than needing to make the content, the appearance of the content fit the expectations of an American developer, when the American developer does not necessarily know how a Kazakh audience would prefer to experience whatever you're trying to express, or a Japanese, or many others where this happens. So, yeah, this is all kind of ongoing work. The first base layer of this is sort of quote-unquote done, in that the appearance and the capabilities and the functionality of a single message has been now well defined as a Unicode MessageFormat, which is a part of the Unicode CLDR's LDML specification, the Unicode Technical Standard 35. But then all of the things building on top of this in the stack of what makes up the web is still kind of in progress and in flight in some ways. There's a JavaScript TC39 proposal for Intel.MessageFormat that is at stage 1 and has been at that level now for a little while. Then the syntax for what does a whole message resource look like, that is now being incubated at the W3C Internationalization Working Group, as I mentioned before. And then there's this stuff that I just presented to you, which would be nice to advance further. But I would also prefer not to be like the guy doing localization for the web. And sometimes it feels like I am that guy. And this is kind of why I'm here. Because what I'm trying to tell you is that there are interesting problems to be solved here. And this is, to some extent, greenfield development, because we do not have a localization solution for the web. I think I can present what could be one, what I think should be one, But, you know, it's not just me, it's all of us, everybody else who's participating in this process. And it's we're in a weird situation defining better internationalization and localization tools for the web at the moment, where in practice, the body where you can go to at the moment to present about internationalization proposals and features and so on is the TC39TG2. So that's the part of the JavaScript specification definition work that is defining the Intel object. This is the body that currently exists and is meeting every month, is considering new proposals and advancing things. And it is also a body that is relatively close to the work going on at Unicode, which is also working very much in this space. But there is not really an equivalent body for where do I go to talk about doing this work for HTML? How do I advance this work rather than needing to talk to all of what we G? And it's challenging. So there's that. But there's also other parts of this that are possibly interesting. And tomorrow morning, there's a breakout session that Luca and I are hosting. Luca is there, yes. Talking about some part of advancing localization and internationalization capabilities for HTML. But yeah, that's me. That's this project. I'm very happy to talk more, answer any questions that you might have. Yeah, and happy also to have other people participating in this work if you think that localization is something we should improve. Yeah. Do we have time for questions?
I guess this question is maybe one of those questions that still needs answering, that you'd like to discuss, but where do you see the browser swapping the localization in? Is that something where it will replace the actual DOM content? That's like if you then go and query select, you'll get the localized content? Or is it maybe going into a shadow DOM that's rendering rather than the actual content?
I have a hard time figuring out what would be a better solution than actually changing the text node and other content of elements while this is happening. But I would be happy to find another solution for that. But I think that's ultimately where we're going to end up with this, I hope.
Go ahead, Keith. Phil, you might be asking what I asked, so just get it. Now it's okay. Whew, that's loud. So when I was looking at this, I had a similar, like, is it going in querying selector to put, so you send down a whole document, and then you have to, like, go fetch the data that you put in there. They're called messages, so another model would be to like push things in, like push them into those slots. And it's just making me think of the work that's happening in Whatwig to push data. What is GNOME's thing called? Yeah, declarative partial updates. And I was just wondering if you had looked at that or you see any relationship there, because if so, then there's an opportunity to get people from two completely different interests to work on the same thing, which would be great.
I have not had the bandwidth to look deeply into that because, like, it's all the standards bodies. This is why I'm saying I would like to help with this. I want to work on this. I cannot do all the work. This is why I'm here.
Yeah, so the replacing in the text node, and to kind of Luke's comment about, like, could you do it in a shadow tree? I think it gets really unpleasant really quickly for two reasons. One is we don't want it to create shadow trees for every element, so you'd have to like have some kind of container element if you were to do a shadow tree, which means pretty much everywhere that you have copy, you're going to have this element, and so that feels pretty unwieldy for a developer. The other really annoying bit, though, is the other route, which is to replace the text content inside of a text node. It seems reasonable on the surface, modulo like potential issues around scripts expecting one locale and getting another. But one really, really tricky element of that is that an element can have multiple text nodes inside of it, and they can be split in quite interesting ways. And there are certain frameworks like React that will split them and move them in certain ways. And existing translator tools like Google Translate can often break websites because it will do that. It will replace the text nodes, but in doing so collapses the various text nodes inside of an element. And any code that expects multiple text nodes to be in the element, for example, React's reconciliation algorithms, then break. And so you can actually like stop a React website from working by just clicking one button, which is the Google Translate button. And that is like quite a common issue that comes up in a lot of these frameworks. All of this to say is a really long way of saying I don't think either of the solutions that Luke presented are particularly nice solutions, because they have pretty large ramifications for both the browser but also the developers. And so I don't know what the answer is, but just throwing those things out there, really. Sorry.
Yes. Yes. There are needs that we can define that aid localization for having certain inline content be able to come through the localization, like being able to add emphasis around certain parts, being able to define that this is a link, other text element stuff that is very valid to have within localization. But in particular, thinking about this from the points of need of localization, there is a boundary beyond which there is no need, for instance, to be able to have a table element and all of its contents coming through a localizable message. There's some contention of whether even elements within elements should be presentable, whether you should be able to have a localizable message that contains a UL with LI elements in it. For example, this is not something we currently allow for Firefox, and we're able to do really great things with it. But we don't need to allow all HTML in all messages in order to have a very, very powerful and useful thing. So accounting for some of those limitations that the system, should we choose to deploy it, would maybe ease up on some of the concerns about what might happen. Not all of them. It'll always be possible to shoot yourself with the foot with web technologies.
I was going to ask about how you keep the system robust in the face of crowdsourced localization, but I suspect the answer is going to be very similar to the previous question.
That's a whole other topic. That's the other thing my team at Mozilla is working on. How do you deal with localization coming in from volunteers? The way you do that is by you have them building up trust and nominating some of them to be translators and managers, and you have new messages who come in from random people going through an approval process to go in. None of that has any relevance to this runtime concern, though. I mean, it might be a way that you end up getting those messages, but there's other solutions for this as well. It's a different problem. It's an interesting problem, though.
There we go. To everyone who has been talking about the text nodes and document fragments and all these things, I think this is actually something we'll be discussing tomorrow at the breakout session, because it will be very relevant also to the time formatting. So if you care at all about this, please come to the breakout session tomorrow. It's 10 a.m. first session. one of the rooms here will figure that out.
The JavaScript room.
JavaScript room, haha. Even though we are not doing JavaScript.
Hello. The proposal in TC39 is at stage 1 because there was desire for more industry experience with the formatting, with the
With
message
Unicode
format.
MessageFormat as a syntax, yes.
Yeah. So how has that experience gathering gone?
It is slowly progressing. It is not one of these things where you define a new standard and suddenly everyone is using it. One of the challenges has been in ensuring that ICU itself is providing a good implementation of that. I maintain a message format library in JavaScript that is fully spec compliant. The ICU4J implementation is compliant, but the ICU4C implementation should be compliant only in the next release of ICU. So it's a slow process.
Thanks, Eemeli.
Thank you.